Well, good evening, everyone. Justin from Just Your Average Fishos, here for another massive Saturday night, Mother's Day Eve. Hope you've all packed the presents, haven't forgotten about it. Can't see them anyway, but hey, what the hell, let's talk some fishing. Absolute ripping show tonight with true snapper royalty on the show. Before we get into the show, and we are going to cover it all in relation to snapper, Westernport Bay, Port Phillip Bay, the whole works, fishing with some plastics, what rigs to use, what days to go fishing, how to find fish. I'll be asking all the difficult questions to our wonderful panel, and we only have a couple of guests tonight to make sure that we can cover this topic properly, because Melbourne does go into snapper frenzy at a couple of different times throughout the year. Before we get started, a very big thanks to our show producer, Ben at We Are Technical, helping businesses connect digitally and live in a conference format. Of course, if you work for a big company and you need to become more COVID connected, Ben's your man. Second of all, a very big thank you to the boys down at Complete Angler Ringwood, my local tackle store. Obviously support yours, but my local tackle store for putting up one ripping snapper prize pack with all the snapper essentials tonight for the best question asked and chosen by our producer. I'll be personally express posting that to you first thing Monday morning. And that prize this evening is a massive snapper pack with all of the essential bits and pieces. It includes various poundage of Jinkai line, all the best Gamakatsu hooks, some pre-kamikaze or pre-rigs, so you can sliding rigs, Black Magic snapper snatchers, and some soft plastics bits and pieces, and Shimano soft plastics pack. So it is absolutely fantastic. We thank Complete Angler Ringwood very much for that, and we look forward to all of your questions. Of course, keep putting them up. I'm sorry if they don't all come to air. We ask the best ones that we can, and if you are putting ones up that we might have just covered or in topics that we are about to cover, it might not hit the air as well. So bear with us. There is a lot to talk about when we're talking snapper. So first person I'd like to welcome back to the show, Justin, mate, thank you for joining us and talking all things Westernport snapper tonight. Great to have you back talking with us this evening. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. Thanks, Justin. Obviously, obviously the weather's got a bit colder this week, so be keen to get out of fish maybe Monday.
Fingers crossed for us all, and obviously fingers crossed for us all. And I know that we're all going to be looking Monday morning at Mr. Andrews' press conference, hoping that we can go fishing. I'm hoping that kids can go back to school as well, so I can go fishing to beat the ramp rage. But it is a bit cold, but snapper can still be caught in Westernport Bay in those colder months. How's your fishing go for snapper yourself through the colder months in Westernport Bay?
Yeah, through the colder months, obviously I'll still do my gummies and stuff like that, but probably from early July I'll start fishing for snapper. That'll be the top end in the shallows. Like Bolton's, Boucher's, Lyle's Channel, right up in them shallows. So,
fantastic. Yeah. All right. Well, let me just introduce our next guest, who's an absolute champion and a long-term charter operator, known to be Mr. Snapper himself in Port Phillip Bay, the owner and proprietor of Unreel Fishing Charters, James Rogers. Thank you very much for joining us this evening and giving us your time. Welcome to the Just Your Average Fisho show.
Thank you for having me. Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine.
It's working again. That's
No, you've lost a little bit of your backdrop, but it doesn't matter. We just press on with the show. You know, it's pretty unpolished like the rest of us. Can you just introduce a little bit about Unreel Fishing Charters? How long have you been fishing Port Phillip Bay, and what does snapper fishing mean to you?
Well, I guess in a nutshell, I grew up fishing. Well, I grew up fishing both bays, but Port Phillip Bay was the bay that we fished the most, and probably once you start to nut something out, you keep with it. So I just had a dream as a kid. My dad comes from Mildura, so he came down here looking for the salt water, just loved the idea of catching saltwater fish. And so I guess he didn't know a lot about what we've got here. And so I grew up as a little kid learning it with Dad. And as I got to be a teenager. I was just totally fanatical. Like, my nickname at school was Fish. If there's anyone who's watching who went to my school, you will remember. And anyway, so I ended up just keeping on with the fishing. But I had the dream to be able to catch snapper all the time. I just loved them. I just absolutely was so taken by snapper. I just wanted to be able to catch snapper anywhere at any time. And so I just put the time and the effort into it. I sort of got to the point where, as I grew up, I just went snapper fishing every day, in winter, in summer, in winter, in summer. I went in Westernport, I went in Port Phillip, but I feel like I still haven't got it all completely worked out, but I've worked out a fair bit of it. So most of the time I feel like I can catch them, but they still mystify you some days, that's for sure.
Well, they're fish and they swim to different areas, and sometimes they feed to a different tune. Look, someone of your calibre and your experience, Unreel Charters, how long have you been operating Unreel Fishing Charters for, and where do you operate mainly out of?
So I started in 2007, and yeah, just hoping to do it as something that I really enjoyed on the side, because I was going fishing every other moment of my life and not spending enough time at home. My wife probably suggested that maybe I should try and do that a little bit, part-time, to try and get a bit of the fishing bug out of me. But I don't think it worked. So now, instead of going to work and then going fishing, or getting up in the morning, going fishing, going to work, coming home and then going straight back to fishing again, I sort of pretty much just go fishing, and I leave here at 4 a.m. I'll get back at about midnight every single day, just about. So I'm getting to do what I really, really love. So I've been doing it for probably around about 12 years as a charter. And probably after about 3 years, I had to leave the work that I was doing. I was a builder. I guess I still am a builder. I got my license, but I had to stop doing that and start just being full-time on the boat. And that's been like that since probably about 2011-ish. We've been full-time. So
fantastic.
It's been great.
Oh, wonderful. All right. Now, I'll let you collect your thoughts, because we're going to pump you full of questions this evening with someone of your expertise. But certainly we have a wide viewing audience, and I'd like to start off with Justin this evening in Westernport Bay, if possible. So, Juzzy, we all know that Westernport Bay holds some very big snapper. It's a great fishery. And I like to start off the show and talking to our guests about what is their main snapper stick that they're going to put on the boat to go catch with. What's your rig set up? And a bit of a long question, this one. And then if you're looking to go snapper fishing, what's your preferred day and time? I know you fish a lot of nights. What's your preferred day and time and weather pattern to go fishing? If you can start off with the snapper stick, let us know what the arsenal is.
Yeah, so I do have a multi-purpose rod, as in which is same as my gummy rod and stuff like that, because obviously fishing Westernport, you don't always just catch snapper if you're fishing for snapper. I've got a samurai rod, which is an Osprey, which is probably overkill for a snapper, which is 30 to 50 pound. So it's overkill for a snapper, but when you get a good snapper, it is a good fight. So,
yep.
Running sinker rig, same again, like my gummy rig. Also too, in some areas, using a dropper, which I don't always use for gummies, but just having that dropper as well. So sometimes with snapper, you're fishing a bit heavier lead if you're fishing a bit deeper, but still getting that bait off the bottom.
Okay. And so let's say someone wants to approach Westernport, and Westernport can be highly tidal, fast-running currents.
Correct.
What sort of weather patterns are you looking for, depths are you liking to try and sound snapper up to drop for a snapper fish in Westernport?
Depending on where it is and if it's an idle day, what the barometer is doing and stuff like that. I'm more than like same again with my gummies and stuff like that. It's when we tide. Like you can fish it and be fishing obviously wind against tide, which the snapper do like because it chops it up. But I don't tend to do that much. I'm still looking for them calmer nights and sitting out and just waiting for a fish.
Yep, sure. And preferred depths there, Justin?
Over winter, I'm fishing shallow. So up the top end, I'm fishing anywhere from probably 4 metres to 2 metres. And then obviously coming to season, obviously grand final week and stuff like that, just after grand final, I'll be fishing out the front of Hastings in anywhere from probably 8 metres to maybe 14.
Okay. And what about your baits? I know that you love doing a bit of land-based fishing, and that's where a lot of your baits can come from.
Yeah.
Fresh is always best. We've spoken about that on a number of shows before. What do you find in Westernport has worked really well for you with baits for snapper?
Bait is probably key. Is probably getting squid, fresh squid. Even over winter, I know if I catch a fresh squid and I go up that top end, that squid's dynamite, as in for a bait. Also, too, I'm burling a lot, especially over them winter months. And like you might only sound one fish, or you might even not sound a fish, but you know the fish have been there in previous years, and you just wait it out. So.
Yep, cool. And prime fishing time in Westernport for you?
Same again, depending when I'm fishing and stuff like that. But if I'm fishing top end, it's still a run out tide. Obviously, when everything's pushing off them banks, and when you're getting into them finger channels and stuff like that, once they push off them channels, you're more of a chance of catching a fish too. Yep. So everything filters back into them channels up there.
Okay. Now, you do a lot of land-based fishing, Juzzy, and I imagine that you've caught it. Well, I've seen some of the photos of your land-based snapper catches.
Yeah.
Often when you're going for gummies, can you specifically target snapper land-based, or is it just a bycatch for gummy shark fishing?
You can catch like snapper wires and stuff like that. If I was to go fish for a snapper, I'd be down at Coronella down that way. Otherwise, down to Stockyard Point, which obviously many snapper have been caught down that way. Cows Pier is a good one for snapper, obviously over the season. And obviously the other side, where you're fishing summers down to Point Leo there. If you're looking for calmer weather with that northerly, you're probably looking for the opposite with the snapper, with the southwesterly and it chopping up and stuff like that. We've had nights down there where I've gone for gummies and the weather hasn't been ideal and it's been a southwesterly and we've caught snapper. So it's blowing them into the shores, and obviously they're feeding up close. So,
yep, fantastic. Okay, now tell me about hooks for snapper. So you're going for squid. Are you using a strip or a ring and single or a double hook rig?
Yeah, early season I'm using a ring or a head or a bigger bait. And then when obviously the snappers start to get on the chew and stuff like that, I'm maybe using half a pilly and a bit of squid. Otherwise, trevally. Pike again, and cooter when the cooter are around, even a fresh cooter strip.
Yep.
So still fresh baits.
Yep. Hook size, leader size?
Yeah. 8-0s? No. Well, the thing is, so like I'll still use an 8-0 hook fishing for snapper. I do downsize my hook size to obviously what's what you think you're going to catch, and if you're losing baits and not actually having fish. Yeah.
Cool. No worries. All right. Well, lots of love for the land-based and land-based Kings fishing beanie there. Thanks, Heng, for all the beanie support. Heng runs a wonderful page called Land-Based Kings, and it's a wonderful Facebook page to follow if you're into your land-based fishing. We might cross over now and we'll mix it up a little bit, Juzzy, give you a bit of a rest and talk with one of our special guests this evening, James, about Port Phillip Bay. So, James, first question I'd like to throw to you is that, people love to catch snapper, and snapper are one of those species that if you find them, they'll either fire or they won't. Could you just talk us through, to the average boater out there that wants to go catch snapper, what's a couple of things in your charter experience you could say is an essential requirement for them to consider to go out and get a couple of snapper?
I think probably the two biggest things is one, the time of day. So obviously the bite time. And the other thing is being in the right spot. So some people might think that means I need a GPS mark, but in my mind, what it means is you need to have the intel to know where the fish are. And like most people would have seen or heard, depending on how much snapper fishing they've done, every season there'll be an area that they seem to favour, and occasionally you get 2 or 3 seasons in a row where they fire in the same area, and then you'll have another season where it's just right out of just completely different. Like the season we just had was really good down sort of Mount Martha and Mornington most of the season. And the season before was undoubtedly probably a Black Rock, was probably the central area. And then the year before that was probably Black Rock and a Williamstown, definitely a Williamstown season. So knowing where that area is to focus on, and if you can be in that area, even if you're not exactly on top of fish that you've sounded, I would say, yeah, probably 70 or 80% chance to catching fish.
Okay.
But so growing up, I remember I had all my friends are down Frankston Way. I'm in Mount Eliza, so a lot of my friends would say to me, this is the worst season we've ever had, the worst season. And I'd say to them, what's going on? Are you catching a few? I haven't even got one snapper this season, And I'd ask them, well, where have you been fishing? We've been fishing the Mile Bridge marks, and we've been fishing the wreck, and we've been fishing, the normal hospital marks. And I think, but you haven't been coming up to Brighton, because Brighton's been sensational. Never had to go to Brighton ever. I've been here for 65 years, So that's a key, definitely knowing where they are.
Okay. Now, let me put it this way, let me ask the question this way as well. Finding where they are, is it a matter of, to someone that might not be as digitally connected and aware with, people that, either fish a lot and have access to that sort of fishing information, is it just best that they go to certain reef areas and try and sound with their sounder? Or, is there any other technique that you could suggest for someone that might be really new into snapper fishing?
Yeah, I suppose definitely yes, because we all know that snapper love a bit of heavy bottom. They love that. And so, but the problem is every single snapper loves that. So, some of them are going to be that big, and we saw a lot of that this year. And then, every now and then you're going to find some that are better sized ones. And so that is a good option, but the problem is you need to know so many different reefy places to go and look through them all, because there will be snapper on every single heavy bit of bottom in Port Phillip Bay, more or less, but the right ones are the ones that and so there's a lot of looking. It is definitely worth doing that, but you take, for instance, there's a lot of artificial reefs and different bits and pieces that you can go and look at. And for me, I find that yes, I do. I look through everything from sort of 3 meters all the way out to the middle of the bay. Sometimes I might have to look at 50 or 60 different areas that I know has got a good bit of bottom or a bit of reef until I finally find something that's holding fish.
Okay. Now, do you find that, say, a particular time in the snapper season lends itself to fishing a certain depth? Because there's certainly times when I've caught snapper quite deep, 22 to 24 metres past the shipping channel on the mud. And there's also been times when we've caught, as you say, 8 to 12 metres, 12 mean tops on reefy bottom. Do you find that a particular timing of the season indicates to whether fish will be deeper or shallower?
Definitely not at all. The only thing I could say, early in the season, definitely go shallow. You got to go north, and north means shallow. So during October, end of September, most of October until probably that last week of October, definitely I would be focusing on that top section from Black Rock across to Point Cook, that, if you draw a line between the two, and predominantly the shallows. So St Kilda, Brighton, Black Rock, right up into Docklands, and Altona is a fantastic. Usually I find there will be a week where Altona starts firing, and that'll usually be in that 5-6 metre line. 3, 4, 5, 7, 8 sometimes, but generally up in that top section of Altona, and then that'll move across. Williamstown will start getting some action for a few days. Then Hobson's Bay in Port Melbourne will fire up, and then pretty much they've hit the top and they'll start spreading. And you'll have another week or two where they're in the shallows. So early season for me is definitely go shallower, but they're still in the deep as well.
Okay.
In those shallows up the top end.
And in Port Phillip Bay, do you find that there's a preferred bait and a preferred rig that you have success with, James, that might be more consistent than others year on year?
Well, yeah, I do. It's funny you ask that, because a lot of people ask that, and I think they don't really want to know the answer, because what they want to hear is fresh baits, got to go catch it yourself, and there's lots of things people want to hear. But the honest truth is that I haven't, and I don't think I ever will come across something that's better than, I've actually got some right here. I'm going to show you.
Okay. Everyone's glued to their screen right now.
Let's find out what the best bait that I've ever used for me.
The humble pilchard, yeah.
Really? Because I don't know if the camera can see that.
Yeah.
That is just so filled up with yummy stuff. It's like you've just gone and bought a pizza and the cheese is melting and it's just so yum. And the smell is just amazing. I don't leave them on very long. I don't give them a chance to run out of that beautiful, juicy stuff. I just tell my customers, you got a couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, I want you to pull up, check your bait. If it looks like it's got no flavour, whip it off, throw it in the water and put a new one on. So that way they're burleying, as well as we're putting those beautiful bits in the water, and the burley effect of that is incredible. Whereas and I've done this so many times over the years, I've switched over to silver whiting or to squid, and I've got to burley with pillies really heavily to be able to compensate for what I'm missing out on. And then because the baits are a bit harder, we miss more bites, so our hookup ratio is not as good. Okay.
And what's your preferred leader size, hook size? And are you obviously using twin hook rigs for pillies, or?
Well, I've actually done a couple of things a little bit different. So yes, I just whipped up a couple of rigs just to show you. Obviously, that's what we're all pretty much used to in Port Phillip. I don't know if you can see that. Just the twin hooks. They're just twin 5.0s, Gamakatsus or Shoguns. I think I've got there. I don't know what I've got. Those, so long as they're sharp and strong, it doesn't really matter. Probably about 3 inches in between. And then a few years ago, what I started doing, just all because I measure how many bites you get as to how many fish you get in the boat. I just hate missing a bite or a buckle. So we started experimenting with things, and you saw I had that pilly where I'd cut the head off it. So what I found is that by reducing the pilchard size, the hookup ratio was a bit better. We went up probably about maybe 20% better hookup ratio. And I don't know whether I felt like we're getting more bites, and maybe it's because I've opened the pilly up and the smell's a bit easier to find it. So, but 2 years ago, that's one rig. Off the back of the boat, we throw those, and then I'm using 3 different rigs. So this is probably the other deadly rig. You've probably seen one of these before.
Your paternoster style or your snapper snatcher style? Yep.
So basically, that is just a snapper snatcher, and it's just home tied without the tinsel town. And so I put them to the test. When I first started using the snapper snatchers, I'd let the guys 4 on one side use the feathers, 4 on the other side no feathers. And over about 3 or 4 weeks of sort of catching, I don't know how many snapper we were catching in a few weeks, but a lot, I saw absolutely no difference. Sometimes the ones with feathers got more bites, sometimes the ones with feathers got no bites. And, it was just that normal thing where one guy gets 3 fish in a row and everyone else doesn't. It was completely, in my mind, no advantage to having the feathers. So then I just started tying my rigs. Having 2 hooks does give you a little bit of an edge, but we don't get that many snapper on the top hook. We still get them. So having that one hook about a foot above, somewhere about sort of 30 centimetres above, so that the bait is at eye level, which is another thing that proves that snapper, some people say that they were swimming mid-water, and I know they can, but that higher hook, quite often people will bring their own snapper snatchers and they'll have one hook that's maybe 6 80 centimetres above the bottom, and they're not getting bites. And I have to notice that and let them know you're not getting bites because you're out of that eye level. You know, they're not looking up; they're looking sort of at the bottom, and they're fossicking in the bottom. So that is amazing. And what I probably wanted to note with the snapper snatchers is that we probably catch more fish with snatchers than we do with the traditional rods cast off the back. I would say 60% on the snatchers, 40% on the back rods. And these are awesome as well because we don't lose many fish. When you've got a bite, probably 9 out of 10, maybe 9.5 out of 10 sometimes come in the boat. The last rig that I've got my son Tristan here with me. You can't see him. He's just sitting beside me.
G'day, Tristan. Welcome to the show, mate.
So Tristan's 18, and he was with me when we started doing some different things. We started going very light, and so we started to use our whiting rods, our little 2 to 4 kilo nibble tips, really, really soft rods, and then just with like most of us have used these rigs before, but just a circle hook about well, depending on how, I'm trying to see where the camera is here, depending on what size fish you're targeting, but the 5.0, I find anything that's legal and up seems to snag them beautifully, and with just a little running sinker, and you don't want too thick a line. I forgot to mention with my other rigs, I just use 50 or 60 pound anything that's not rubbish, you know, as long as it's not just a good soft abrasion-proof line, because, you know, in Port Phillip, I don't want to have to re-rig them every single trip. If I can get away with lines lying on the bottom, rubbing on scallops and bits of oyster and stuff like that. So I use a kind of a thick mono, and that doesn't seem to bother the snapper what line you use. But with these, I feel like a lighter leader makes a bigger difference. They do pick them up, they feel very little resistance, and they swallow it, and it goes right down inside, and they swim off, and that rod just starts bending over. And I reckon that there's probably sometimes the rod tips in the water before they even seem to know what's going on. In fact, sometimes before I used to tell my customers, don't touch the back rods, because quite often we muck it up, we miss the hook up. Now I don't even look. I don't even care. You know, sometimes they lift the rod and they strike, and I say, oh no, you don't have to strike, just wind. Just lift it and walk backwards. And sometimes they kind of strike and they muck it up, and I go, no, try it again. And the fish is still there. They didn't even know they had a hook in their mouth. And quite often the circle is actually gone right down inside, and they've swallowed, because we're just putting a cube of pili on there. And if we get in trouble by a little tiny snapper, we do what Justin said, we use just a little squid strip on there as well. So you've got the backup. Come back for a second grab. And I tell you what, that has turned out to be probably one of the most deadly tools in my trade. We don't miss many fish at all. You know, like you get buckles and they you turn around, you hear a rod just going, zzz, 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 zzz. You can't even see it because it's so, you know, it's bent so far down in the water, but they're already hooked.
Yeah, that's fantastic, isn't it? And so lighter line, so we're using what, a 20, 30, 40 pound mono on that rig?
So on that, that's a thin, a pretty light gauge 15 pound. So I was using 12, but it was just a little bit, we just got pipped a little bit right at the end a few times on the knot where their teeth are wearing.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones that we were having trouble is if they were hooked inside and their teeth were rubbing on the knot. That's where we lost a few good fish. So I just went up to, I'm just using this stuff now, the platypus.
Platypus, yeah.
It's a sort of a thin, pretty thin gauge 15, I think, and it's beautiful. And I had some photos there that I'm not sure if.
Yep, Ben can bring those up for us. So here we go.
Yeah. Now I'm just thinking with the maybe Ben, if you can have a look at some of those big fish. There was a couple of big fish, and the only, not to brag, the only reason I wanted to show them is because all of those fish were caught on a 2 to 4 kilo nibble tip rod. They were all actually on. Was that last one that we got? Was that on the 15 pound Tris? The one, I don't know. I think that was on 12 pound as well before we changed up to the 15. So pretty much in the last, well, one of those was from the season before, but we had one more at the boat, which was a definite 20 plus. It was somewhere that 9, 10 kilos, and we just about had it in the net, and it pulled the hook at the last second, but we all saw it. But it takes you 15 to 20 minutes sometimes on those really big ones to play them out, and it is just, it's scary, but it's exciting, but they usually don't get off.
Yeah,
good, and it's so much fun.
Yeah, fantastic. Now tell me, with some of those rigs lying on the bottom when you're on charter, how do you go about dealing with the masses of flathead that often pick up on the bottom? Like, I suppose it's great when you get something that's, a 40 centimetre plus, because it goes in the bin and it's a great feed. Port Phillip Bay still has some good size flatties, but you can get those little munchkins that just destroy your baits consistently, particularly when you're burling pellies as well. Is that just part and parcel of snapper fishing, or have you got a different way to deal with that?
Yeah, yes and no. So I think all of us have to just cope with the flatties. My new philosophy is now, thank you, flatties, for doing the burley for us. That's because they get down there. We've got, let's say we've got our snapper snatchers. We've got our little cubes of pillies. I don't bother putting anything else on. Some people say, can't you give a squid or silver whiting? And so they don't know. In my mind, I know that when we keep dropping these, it just ups the tempo. And so it's hard work. I'm not chopping any pillies anymore. I used to chop 10 kilos per charter, but now it's just put your cube on, drop him to the bottom, wait 2 or 3 minutes. If you haven't had a bite, pull it up. If you've still got a bait on and it looks all right, you can drop it back down, or otherwise put a new one on. But every time they drop that down, the flatties start having their little pick, 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 pick. Sometimes you've got the little piranha, little baby snappers, and they do their little pick, pick, pick. So it's making a cloud of beautiful smell. It's like the barbecue across the road, or fish and chip shop down the road. And you know what? It works. It's hard work. If there's 2 of you in the boat, you might want to put 4 rods out the back, and then you've got your 2 or 3 snatches out the sides. You've got to you can't sit down. That's the only thing. Like, if you want to sit down, you've got to put silver whiting on, and you've got to throw your burley. You've got to keep chopping pillies and throwing it around. But I find that just constantly, if there's 2 of us, then one person, you look after the rods on that side, I look after this side, and you never sit down. You're just winding in a rod, rebaiting it. If there's a bit on, we just slap it in the water, which burleys, new bait, flick it out, and then wind the next rod. And so it is hard work, but we're there to catch a fish. So,
yeah. And activity breeds activity, doesn't it? It's a really good saying that,
So there was a philosophy growing up that if you're catching heaps of flatties, the snapper aren't there. But if you're catching heaps of flatties, then the snapper, if they're close by, I'm sure we've all probably experienced that time where you're getting nibble, 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 and then bang, you get a snapper, and then all of a sudden there's no more flatties. They're just gone. And then when the snapper are running out, because all of a sudden you start catching a few flatties mixed in again until, the bite, you get one snapper, and then 20 minutes later you get one and the flatties are coming. So that either the bite time's gone or the fish have moved on.
Okay. Now, we're going to ask you 2 more quick fire questions before I just head back, give you a bit of a rest and head back to Justin for a minute. So, of course, if you're someone that's a fanatic like me, fishing fanatic, or tragic, I suppose is the better thing to say, I follow a lot of forums, and snapper season comes around, or, even the winter run comes around, and the reports just show people showing sounder shot after sounder shot of snapper trees. Now, are you looking for snapper trees? And I know we've got a couple of photos there that you've given Ben, our producer, tonight. Are you looking for snapper trees, or what? So here's a few of your sounder shots up on screen now. What are you looking for that go, I'm going to drop here? People want to catch fish on a charter, right? So what makes you want to drop it? Is one's hoarding on the bottom better because you think they're feeding, or if they're up a little bit off the bottom? What makes you pick a snapper tree to go, I want to drop there?
It's a good question, actually. So I think just years of seeing it again and again and again, I know when I see the right thing, usually I'll say to my customers or my friends or myself, whoever's with me, oh my goodness, this is ridiculous. And that's when I'll take a photo. And I'm so sorry that I haven't got better photos. I am not a good technological person, and between me and my son, Tristan, I have got so many good photos, but they're way back on Facebook, and I tried to go there and the iCloud didn't let me get back that far. So I just quickly picked a few that I hoped would be able to show me a couple of different scenarios. So I don't know, Ben.
We'll put them back up, and if you could talk us through them, that'd be great. So Ben will put them up. There we are.
So the one in the middle is a very fuzzy photo that the iCloud didn't quite download it all the way or send it back. I took a photo anyway. Now that is a 100% tree, and that was ridiculous. That was like a 10-minute bag out 10 people. It was just every snatcher that didn't even hit the bottom. You can see, for anyone who's watching, if you look at that middle photo, now my gain on the Fruno is set at about 5.5. So when you see big red blobs like that, that you can see those red blobs, and that was probably 3 or 4 meters tall, that one, wasn't it, Trev? Yeah. That's the only time that I'll ever say that I'll fish something that is off the bottom, is if they're on top of snapper, on top of snapper, on top of snapper. But they've got to be good, solid blobs or little chunks. Now, I would never suggest that anybody go out looking for snapper trees. There's usually a time in that first week of November where it must be when they start doing some spawning movement, because that's when we seem to find them. And me and Sini from Real Time, we had all these different philosophies. We did a lot of stuff with sounding and that together, and we both came up with that theory that probably that first 10 days of November is the time to start looking for trees. It might vary a little bit season to season, but that always seems to be it. So you only find a tree by accident when you're looking for one or two of those little grubbies. And if you're on those 3 photos, there was one where you see, 3 or 4 hard on the bottom in about 10 metres, I think it is. And to me, they look like those little caterpillars. You see those little caterpillars and they do those grubs. So I haven't had success with fishing on any snapper or anything that I've seen on the sounder unless they're pretty much hard on the bottom. And they can be, one beside or on top of each other. You might get 2 or 3 grouped together, but some part of the tick or the arch that you see needs to be connected to the bottom.
And is that feeding behaviour, James? Do you think that's them, or wanting to feed in that sort of depth?
Look, this is my opinion. I believe that snapper are a bottom feeder and they're a bottom fish, and they get barotrauma really easily, so they don't like coming off the bottom. I believe that there's a lot of other fish in the bay, and snapper are only one of the fish that we see when we're sounding. So, for instance, sometimes we've seen cooter that would be in that 1 metre above the bottom, and we've caught them, and I've realised that they're cooter. Another one, especially if you're fishing near any kind of reef, the old porcupines and toadies. Mm. So I've done a couple of dives around a couple of reefy areas where I've marked up amazing fish so close to the bottom, big, perfect arches, and then I've gone down and I've seen a group of porcupine fish hanging around down there, and I've realised, oh my goodness, we have this philosophy that everything we see on our sounder has to be a snapper. So that's just one thing. And then there's another thing, and it takes a lot of sounding sometimes to find what you're looking for. And I think if you don't already have an area where you know there's some fish, you're really looking for a needle in a haystack. And then, so there's 2 things I want to add. One is sometimes you'll go in the area where you know there's fish and you won't be able to sound anything. I know Justin said that before. Sometimes you don't sound anything. And, some of our best days we have not sounded a fish, but you've got to back yourself with that instinct that just comes by going out there all the time. You know there's fish there. They've been there the last few days. You've marked up nothing. Just sit there and try. And I have a philosophy, give it 15 minutes of hard burling. at the right bite time. And if nothing shows up, move on quickly. Don't muck around and waste time, because if they're there, then usually you'll get a bite within 15. That's my philosophy. If they're not there and you wait for 2 hours, you might get one bite, but I'm not looking for one.
No, that's look. I'm a firm believer of, and I've spoken in many of the reports that I've written, James. Activity breeds activity, and I put out a 10 tips snapper thing last season. Said what has worked for some of my friends and myself, and it was almost treating it a little bit like whiting fishing, going and finding those areas where you've caught fish before or that are known reefs, sound up snapper, drop on them. But if you haven't, I was saying more like 20 minutes. If you're not done, move, because you then move on. And if you've got like in your little system, you're very quick to deploy your baits and get some burley running with how quickly you're changing things. In 1 hour, you could easily find 3 or 4 schools that you've dropped on and then found the one that's firing and could get you to a bag out status in 15 minutes. So it seems that to be that way.
And it is so, look, it's so important to have the network and also just that mindset of areas, you know, and it is a game, you know, like you start trying to put together rumours and things you hear, friends. Someone says, last night I was down at Table Rock and we slayed them down there, and then you hear somebody else last night was at T15 and they did really well. And at the same time, you hear somebody got them really good off Seaford in 15 metres. And so you start putting this little jigsaw together a bit, and, you know, you might not sound up a fish, but you end up going to all these areas where you know friends have got them and you're looking around. Sometimes you look around, or they might have sent you some numbers of where they caught them. You see nothing and you think, do we just give it a quick go? And sometimes if you're quick enough, you can try 3 or 4 or even 5 spots within that bite time, see nothing on the sounder, and actually still find them really good just because of your little network, or, you know, places that last week they were going good and you knew about it. And, I actually had one other, we had some sounder shots that we were looking at before, and I know these ones we were struggling to get up. I don't know whether you can see that on my...
We can see that well. Yep, that looks good.
I'm just going to show you a couple of photos of what looks good, and I get photos from a lot of friends a lot of times, and sometimes I don't want to be cruel, and it probably is a bit yuck. You think you found something really good, and then, you know, you send that to your mates and you say, wow, look what I find, and they just wouldn't bite, you know, and that light is not doing a lot of justice.
That's pretty clear there, mate. Yep.
So that's my new Simrad. I started using a Simrad in my big boat this year, and I really like it. It's taken me a while to get used to it, but I've turned that down to, I think I've got the gain at like -8 or something, and other friends of mine have got it set on the auto setting or a little bit positive. And so when I do that, now, just so that you know, how deep is that? Oh, that's 18 metres. Okay. There's probably another shot there in a bit shallower. No, there's not. I wanted to show you a shot of, say, 6 to 8 metres. So I remember finding what I thought was absolutely amazing, and I just kept losing baits, and I wasn't even my rods weren't even buckling, even on those light rods. And anyway, so what I did, I went down a hook size, I put little bits of squid on, and next thing you know, we were catching 10 centimetre, 6 centimetre little pinkies. And that's what they are. They're like halfway undersized. So if a keep size is 28, these are like 14 centimetre snapper, and they look awesome. To be honest, like, look how perfect those arches are, and that is undersized fish, and to the point where I couldn't even get a bite out of them because they're just so small. They can't even get the bait and the hook in. They can get the bait off, but they can't get the hook in their mouth.
And that's sometimes also a suggestion which I'm going to write a bit of an article on, that some sounders, particularly depending on the transducer you use, so I use a high-wide mainly in my boat, it will amplify the size of the fish to what it really is, and you will come across what you think is a really, really awesome school of fish, and it's nothing more than bait. So certainly there is obviously you cover less ground, but it's not so critical in low depths that you could run a low transducer setting, and which won't necessarily provide as much amplification. So before we move over to Justin, though, one really keen question I'd like to sort of speak with you about. Snapper can have pretty finicky bite times, and you're talking about moving from patch to patch to patch. What are weather conditions in Port Phillip Bay, or time of day, or barrow or tide that you find are more productive to find a patch of feeding snapper versus not, from your experience?
Definitely, if I was to say what was the best weather type of day, so it would be, you'll get that day where the barometer just rises all day long and everyone says, oh, barometer's peaking, it's great. To me, that's a tough day, but you've just had a big rough and the water is all nice and looking like Westernport water. It's all nice and kind of just a bit, green, olivey green. And then the next day, when that barometer stabilises, so the first day where the barometer is just stable and happy, that is the day when the water's dirty. So it's about 2 days after the big blow. And sometimes the big blow is still happening, but the barometer's stabilised. You've still got 25 knots. And afternoon, about 3 o'clock, 3:30 is sort of when it starts, and they'll usually go through till 6:30, maybe 7. But that is my favourite. I love the afternoon bite after that blow, because I've got a little bit of time to find them. Whereas in the morning, it's dark. If you don't find them, you're straight away you're on the back foot, because the bite's getting harder as the morning wears on. Whereas in the afternoon, you've got time to find them. The weather's just starting to settle down. The barometer is making them feel happy. That would be my perfect day, and probably somewhere out along the channel edge or in the channel where we're allowed to fish in the channel, but not necessarily. It might be in 6 metres out in front of North Road, or it might be, at Williamstown, straight in front of the footy club, or it could be anywhere, wherever they are. But, gee, I love fishing. I love fishing sometimes that channel edge in an afternoon with ships moving in and out, because that just triggers a bite like nothing. That's probably going to be my perfect scenario.
Fantastic. All right. I'm going to give you a little bit of a break, James, so you can bring Tristan into frame, because I know that Tristan loves soft plastics, and I'm a massive Port Phillip Bay soft plastics fan and fisherman myself. So I would love to ask him some questions and have him involved in the show, because I know you're a bit of a tag team. So shuffle sideways, Tristan. I'm just going to go across to Justin Blythe for a moment. Now, Justin, you've given us some sounder shots, and in Westernport, one of the things that I've done previously, driving along the runway and looking for that singular arch. Do you prefer to find, groups of fish, or you're a single arch person? What works for you?
Normally, if I find a lot of fish, I'll keep going until I'll find a decent arc. So sounding a lot of fish doesn't always mean you're going to catch fish, but I try to find at least a solid arc in all of them fish. So when I'm doing that channel edge, I've passed a whole lot of fish that look like fish. Yep. But aren't always fish.
And you do a lot of fishing at night. So and obviously that's just conducive to the work that you do, but if you had a preference, would you fish morning, afternoon, night, if time was no barrier?
Time no barrier. I still do like my nighttime fishing, and I find I do catch bigger fish of a nighttime, regardless of what it is. But they're not as many, as in you won't go always get your bag or nothing like that, but they'll be a good fish.
Okay. Now, you've given us some sounder shots, so I might get Ben to cue up some of your sounder shots, and if you can talk through a couple of those, that would be fantastic. Here we go. So there's a pretty interesting one with a lot of arcs spread out across the sound.
A lot of arcs. I'm probably, where am I, 15 water temps 15.8, 11.2 depth. I'm out the front of Hastings there, Lysards up towards Longreef. And I'm marking a lot of things that I think are fish. I don't count them as being fish or being snapper, but a lot of things on the screen. So I I actually kept driving up that night, and I think I went to a little bit further up, which would have been another sounder shot. And then I've got fish actually hanging on the bottom, a lot thicker arcs, a little bit broken, but obviously I only just anchored up as well. And the second shot there is showing some bait hanging on the bottom, or maybe being smaller pinkies, but with some bigger fish down there. So if I'm seeing one on that first shot there, one of any of them big arcs touching the bottom, that's where I'm fishing.
Okay, and I think we've got a few of your fish shots there. You've got a couple. You might be able to just talk us through the different depths and time of year that a few of these fish were caught, Ben. So if you can, here we go. Look, we've got a look. Here's a smorgasbord. Oh my goodness!
A few good ones. A lot are out the front of Hastings there, like them. The first one there, that's Hastings out the front, Lysards. Second one's Lysards. That third one's Port Walshpool, so that's not even Westernport, but I thought I might send that one through to you. But yeah, and then you've got the same again, Hastings down towards the bottom of Longreef there, and down towards Reel. So I've got a top end one up there, but we've got some good ones up the top end as well. So
yeah, certainly for many years, Justin, the corals have been well known for snapper, and tends to be where a lot of the boats congregate. And I think it's sort of around the 16, 17, 18 metre mark in certain areas there.
yeah.
But it sounds like a lot of the bigger fish in Westernport are definitely shallower fish, and as little as 2 metres, even some of the gummy sharks as well. Yeah. So if you had a prime depth for Westernport for someone to go out and start sounding around, or just drop the pick and have a crack, what's your thoughts?
Over the winter sort of months, you want to head up that top end, get right up in them channels, get in the shallows on the edge of the bank. You don't always have to mark a fish in them shallows. But you do have to belly. So if you are on an incoming tide, like I'll get down Bolton's, Boucher's channel and stuff like there, and I'll obviously belly to the banks on that incoming tide. So obviously I'm pushing that belly up over the banks and trying to bring the fish back towards where we're fishing. When it gets obviously to season, October, November, that's when I start to fish obviously down towards Hastings, out the front of Hastings, silver leaves, coronella, crawfish and stuff like that. And then obviously you do need word of mouth, as in James said before, and a network of people, as in half letting you know where the fish are and you telling them where the fish are as well. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, absolutely. Justin, what I'll do is I'll cut back to Tristan so we can talk soft plastics for a minute. And Ben, I know, look, I'm just acknowledging that there's been hundreds of questions so far. The show is getting popular. So I'm just going to let Ben collect his thoughts for 5 minutes while we're having a talk to James and Tristan about soft plastics fishing, and he can pump through on the little chat feature here to me some of the questions, and we'll bring everyone together. And I think we'll just see out the show with a really long panel, see if we can pump through as many questions as we possibly can, as Ben can send through to me. So just across to Tristan. Tristan, welcome to the show and thanks for joining us, mate. Now, I'm a big fan of soft plastics fishing, and Port Phillip Bay is a great place to learn soft plastics fishing because it's not as tidal, and snapper can be a little bit of that ambush feeder. So can you tell us a little bit about your soft plastics setup and how you approach soft plastics fishing for snapper?
Yeah, well, I think first of all it depends on like the depth and the area you're going to fish first of all, but I guess like a go-to setup is like something really light, like 2 to 4 kilos, and if it's a bit deeper I might go like 3 to 5 kilo rod, and then depending on the weight of your jig head and the fish, like the size of the fish that you're going to be targeting. But they're generally like a lightweight with I'd say around 15-pound braid, just in case, you know, there's bigger fish and also the snags, bigger jig heads. And yeah, just a small reel, like a 3,000 size reel. I generally use Shimano products. I don't know, it's just what I've always been going up with, so that's what I've stuck to as well.
I might just get you to lean in a little bit close to that mic there, mate, so we can all hear you loud and clear if you possibly can. So what size placky and jig weight and hook size are you using? Because you go down to the local tackle store, you go up to the soft plastics area, and there's a billion plastics and there's a billion different size jig heads and hook sizes. What would be your go-to to start plackies fishing?
Well, because there's two main places where I'm generally subclassing. So it's either like the shallows on like edges of reefs or out deeper, like around the channel area. But generally, I'd say you can go all the way down to like a 3-inch, like jerk shad size. And generally, the reason for that being is because you can catch fish that, I don't know, might be 28 centimeters all the way up to like 70 centimeters length. Like any fish will take that. But then with a 3-inch, I might pair that with like a 1/6 or 1/4, and then like around about 3/0, 2/0 size hook. But then if I'm using like a bigger size plastic, like around 4-inch, 5-inch jerk shad, or even like a squidgy wriggler or something like that, I've tended to use, I think they're discontinued now. It's called the squidgy prawn wriggler. And I don't know, they've brought out like a new range of BioTough plastics now, so I'm not sure if those are discontinued.
Yeah, the pro prawns are still available, so which has either the curly tail or the paddle tail in the prawn shape. Yeah, I think the wriggler though with that curly tail, I'm pretty sure that's still available. They're one of their most famous ones, I think. So if you're out there and your shops don't have them, ask by all means. But yeah, sorry Tristan, I cut you off there, mate.
Yeah, so with those, especially those prawn wriggler tails, they seem to be a favourite, like in the white, pretty sure it's called like a drop bear colour or a white lightning colour. Those two seem to be a standout for like in the deeper areas, whereas if we were fishing on the shallower side, like around Black Rock or even on the mussel farms, something like a 3-inch jerk shad in the nuclear chicken colour seem to be a favourite.
Okay, now what's your thoughts? There's can always be a hotly contested question, but love your theory on it, Tristan. Using scents on soft plastics, do you think it's necessary?
I don't know, like I always thought it can't hurt, like it's not going to scare fish away or anything. I know that some of the gold plastics, they already have scent in there, whereas with the squidgies, like it comes with that S factor.
Mm-hmm.
Like sometimes when I'm really keen, really prepared, I'll add it, but then I don't know. I just reckon the reaction bite tends to be like a lot more proven over like the fish actually coming and smelling that plastic first. So
Now tell us a little bit about the action. So you're flicking the thing out, you're counting it down to sink. Tell me about the action. Is it just a little rod raise or a little sideways flick and a reel? What's your preferred action to work let's say a drop bear, pro prawn or something like that, or even a shad? What sort of way would you work it?
Yeah, so generally with those wriggler tail, like if it has any kind of a wriggle tail on the end, I'll tend to just cast it. As soon as it gets to the bottom, just straight away, just give it like 2 hops, and then just make sure those hops are big, so you can see that the tail gets a lot of action on the fall. And then as soon as it hits the bottom, then just straight away another 2 hops and just do that in the whole retrieve. Even sometimes if we've marked fish straight under the boat, and I won't even bother casting, I'll just drop down because I know there's fish down there, and I'll just keep my plastic in the same position. And almost just use it like I'm using like a metal jig or something like that. Just keep hopping it. I know there's there, they're going to eventually.
All right, question for Dad. Now, James, you've got the young gun on the boat. He probably helps you out a fair bit from time to time. Tell me, does Plackies outfish bait? If one, it was 1 for 1, or is bait outfishing Plackies?
I'm sort of that old school where bait outfishes everything, and I don't know what Tristan reckons, but I feel like it's very hard to beat bait. The plastics do have one advantage though. Sometimes when we're looking for snapper and we can't sound them up anywhere, and we've got a feeling. So like this year, we did a lot of fishing between Port Melbourne shallows right through to where was it pretty good? Down to sort of Black Rock wasn't as good this year. But sometimes the way to find the fish is you just drift over an area and cast soft plastics until you get 1 or 2 bites, and then ping it on your GPS, go back, if you get another bite, bang, put the anchor down and start burling. But that is very useful, really useful.
So a bit of a research technique. Now we've got, just to prove that Tristan does come up with the goods. We've got a couple of lovely photos of him on light tackle. Like, oh my goodness, check out some of these. Like, and some of those big ones you're holding pretty close to yourself there, Tristan. Can you talk us through those photos there, mate?
Yeah, so I can actually remember that. That was like, I'm pretty sure it was 2 years ago. And that was just an early morning, and we had, I don't know, we just gunned out straight off. I'm pretty sure it was around the channel and around, yeah. And yeah, we saw fish on the sounder, and so Dad just flicked out some rods out the back with pillies, and then me and my younger brother, because we're always catching some fish on live gear, it's a bit of fun. We just went straight to our plastics, so we thought, oh, this is our chance to quickly, catch a fish on our light setups. And so that was actually on those regular prawns that I was talking about before, the squidgy ones, either in white lining or drop bait, either or. And we were just, on a, pretty sure it was a 2 to 4 kilo. It was a Zodius rod, and then just a 2500 Stratic reel. And just dropped that down. And we didn't even bother casting because we saw those fish were directly under. So we just popped them, and then within, I don't know, it was pretty instant that we just hooked up, both of us, on light setup. So that was good fun.
Brilliant fish there. And I must admit, I'm a big fan of the Zodius rod. It's my Blackie's rod of choice, well, with the carbon wrap on it. Very, very strong, and certainly outdoes its weight. Now, what I might do is we'll bring us back into the panel now, Ben, if we can, because we'll go for about another half an hour, and I'm sure there's an absolute load of and a myriad of awesome questions that Ben's about to start sending through to me. I suppose one question that I really like to start off with, and James, if I can start off with you, if you said that there was, say, if I asked you what would be 3 to 5 absolute essential things that you said were non-negotiable for someone targeting snapper in Port Phillip Bay, what would they be?
I would say circle hooks, pilchards, what do you think?
I reckon mono definitely.
Mono line, definitely a big advantage. You will get more bites, and definitely you'll hook more fish. What else? I think intel is one of the greatest things you can have. If you don't have it, you're lost. So you need a network. That's 4 things. I honestly believe you don't need a sounder. Too many people are willing to spend too much money on that, hoping it's going to catch some fish. But I think that if you work on the word of mouth, someone tells you this area, that area, that can work really well. I can't think of another one that I would say is as essential as those 4, maybe. Obviously, pilchards is important to me, but it's not the be-all and end-all. My friends fish with silver whiting and squid, and they still catch a lot of snapper. They probably don't catch as many, that's all.
Okay, cool. All right. Justin, we'll shoot the same question over to you. 3 to 5 things, Westernport, thinking Westernport and Westernport only. And I'd also like to ask the same question from a land-based perspective. But first of all, boat in Westernport, a couple of non-negotiables from you.
Main one's marking. And I'd say marking a fish. Unless you've fished that area before, I'd try mark at least a fish. So
yep.
That's relatively down near the bottom there. Next one's probably a tide, and this comes down to intel as well, as James said before. But tide, it might be incoming tide just before the high tide, might be last of the run out, might be mid tide, depending on which areas you're fishing. So with that tide, you could throw in barometer and stuff like that, 10, 20 your barometer, falling barometer, rising barometer. I found I've caught more fish on that rising barometer and when it sort of gets to that peak. But it doesn't matter if the barometer's not right, I'll still go fishing, and more than likely we'll still catch fish. But yeah.
Okay. What about land-based?
Land-based, depending on what side of Westernport you're fishing and where you're fishing. If I was fishing for snapper, which I'd be fishing for gummies anyway, it would be down Summers, Balnarring, down that way. You'd want a southwesterly wind, so you've got a bit of chop on the water. And you're still looking at the same tides as your gummy sort of fishing and stuff like that incoming tide down that way and chop on the water. I don't tend to burley land-based, but if I was going to try, I have tried down at Honeysuckle before for snapper and pinkies and stuff like that, which is just down off Point Leo, in between Point Leo and Shoreham there. And I've used them red burley pellets before, and the snapper we actually got off Honeysuckle there had the burley pellets inside the stomach. So, they're the ones, and they work. So, yeah.
Okay, now what I might do, first question for you, Justin, hot off the ranks by a very close friend of ours, Peter Cook. How does Justin burley in Westernport? Do you throw cubes or down in a cage? Obviously, it's a little bit more tidal in Westernport. How are you burleying, mate?
So I actually use both. I use a cage, and that's got some heavy lead depending on where I'm fishing in it, but I'm dropping a cage to the bottom, and I am cubing if I'm shallow. Otherwise, I'm dropping a thing called a secret weapon, which is like a missile with a sinker on the bottom, and you may be putting 2 or 3 pillies in that and dropping it to the bottom. So if you're casting off the back of the boat, that's actually billing your baits. By the time it actually gets to your baits, it's actually initially billing your baits.
Okay, all right. And just a follow-up question. Ken Barton, with the weed in Westernport, especially north, best tides, do you find, what is the best tides, and do you find it's worse when it's been raining or off big winds for weed?
Up the top end it is, and you can have nights up that top end and you just get plagued by weed. But there is a point in that tide where that weed will stop. So it's if you want to persevere or move or go home, but I tend to persevere. I might only have one rod in at some stage through the night because I'm just sick of pulling weed off them. But once that starts to ease, I've got 4 rods back in and I'm back fishing. So, yeah. Wind up that top end, westerly up that top end on an incoming tide, or an easterly on an outgoing tide, because then you've got wind with tide. But a slow northerly or a slow southerly doesn't really matter anyway.
Okay, and I'll just throw over to James now. So, James, first of all, a question from me. How do you decide whether you're going to fish Port Phillip Bay or Westernport? Because I know you do both. So, obviously the network, but is there any key triggers for you that will make you go to one side of the bay versus the other?
Probably one is when I just draw a blank in Port Phillip and I just can't find anything anywhere. That'll be one, which rarely happens, but it happens. And another one is definitely massive barometer, horrible stuff. And shocking weather. There's sometimes when I just can't, it's 35 knots and I just can't get somewhere in Port Phillip. Like I know that after that 35 knots, everything's good again in Port Phillip. But in Westernport, as Justin said, there's always somewhere that you can go, and like I'll have a few little options in mind. You know, I've always got friends fishing there when I'm in Port Phillip. And you have areas that you know that hold fish, and so you can get there on that. You might have wind and tide together on 35 knots, and it's not that bad. And then, when it turns around, maybe you've got to cancel the next trip, or because sometimes it's just I'll cancel my charter, and me and my boys like Tristan and Dylan and Bailey, we'll still go. And just if it means we can get a fish or a couple of fish, that'll be some of the reasons we'll go. And sometimes it's just I might have a gap between charters, just to go and find out, just to go and see, just go try.
Yep. Okay, now here's a couple, I'll ask this to both of you, so I'll start off with Justin. Colin Thompson, hi guys, I've fished at night quite a bit and have had baits decimated by sea lice. Well, full moon, no cloud there, Colin, can be an issue. So a snapper still feeding amongst these sea lice, or should I move? Justin? Yep.
I don't move. I still fish through it, and I'll probably use squid for baits, which is going to hold on a lot longer than obviously your pilly that's going to last probably 5 seconds down the bottom. And you need tide, so it doesn't matter where you're fishing in Westernport with sea lice. If you've got tide, you won't get as much lice. I probably won't drop as much billy as I normally do when you do get that lice. Otherwise, you're pulling up a cage full of sea lice, and it's just a waste of billy. But I'll still continue to fish. But if I'm fishing a low tidal area, I'm probably going to tend to move somewhere else where I'll get a bit more tide.
Sure. And James, your thoughts?
Yep, very similar. I definitely won't pack up, because if I'm fishing somewhere and I'm getting lice and I believe there's fish there, I will persevere for sure. But like in Westernport, yes, sometimes I've got to sit there for a while and wait because of that tidal thing. It seems to be a trigger point in the tide, and you'll have fish just wandering in and wandering out. Port Phillip, if I'm fishing less than 15 metres and getting lice and I'm not catching fish, then it's time to move deeper. I don't fish deep Port Phillip very much at night time at all anymore.
Yeah, I found that I did some sounder shots when I was out one night just burning some fuel through the boat, clearing the head and not really fishing, James, and seeing that sea lice all over your school was a lot more prevalent in deeper water at night, but also muddy bottom versus, say, reefy bottom in Port Phillip Bay. Do you think that there's any consistency to that?
I don't know. I honestly don't know, but I do know this. When I'm fishing shallower in Port Phillip, especially on a moonlit night, it can be shocking.
Mm.
But sometimes if I push out deeper, I can get away from the lice. But I feel like I'm getting away from, because the night bite Westernport is a much more reliable night bite. The night bite in Port Phillip is a lot more reliable in the top end in the shallower water. It's a lot less reliable, once you get deeper and further down. It's still there. You still get some incredible night bites sometimes, but Westernport, this last season I probably had, we probably had 6 or 7 red hot night bites. I only fished there a dozen times, this last season. So, and we probably had a couple of lice problems, but we just pushed through them and we changed our baits. Like sometimes you can't use pillies, or you just gotta, like Justin said, you got 5 seconds.
That's it. Go on.
Yep. No worries. Now, Neil McKenzie says, can you sound properly at night, or do lice give issues with the reading? Well, Neil, I'll just refer you back to a past live video that I did on the Just Your Average Fisho site, which showed in Port Phillip Bay live soundings, first of all, with what lice look at, and then second video that I did very shortly after, it was about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, what a clear sounder does look like. So, of course, you can still sound snapper amongst lice without a problem, but your screen is a lot more cluttered, and what it tends to do is gives you the false perception that you're sounding fish when actual clusters of lice can appear like fish, on certain sounders as well. So you can actually find that answer by looking back at some of the live videos that I've done. You can search on the Facebook tab for videos or live and scroll back. It was, I think, in the cold times of last year that I did that, so you can have a look there. All right, so Harry Sellers, thanks for watching again, Harry. James, it looks like you prefer Port Phillip. Obviously, you put a lot of fish in the boat. When you're fishing Westernport, is that when your customers are chasing better quality fish? Say you're putting together a special charter. So do you think the bigger I'm reading between the lines there from Harry, the bigger fish in Westernport? Because I think a lot of the big ones that you've shown us tonight are actually Port Phillip Bay, James.
I've never personally caught a 20-pounder in Westernport. Look, I believe that both bays hold big fish. I think Westernport, if what I've learned is true, we might have a little bit of that more eastern strain of fish, which are more sort of like a little bit more of the Port Welsh pool side, maybe trickle in. I don't know. They're slightly different. You get a few more humpy heads in there than you do in Port Phillip. So obviously there's bigger fish than the average pulled out. Like if you were to look at, which bay got the biggest fish each season, Westernport seems to do that. But my theory, or one thing I believe is, Port Phillip holds a lot of big fish, not massive fish. So Port Phillip is a great bay to get a 7 or an 8 kilo fish out of. And it's, obviously both are really good, but Westernport is very hard to consistently pull big numbers of fish when the tides just throw all sorts of curveballs at you. So Justin said it before, there's peak feeding times or times that you might know a place that's holding fish, but they're only there in the last 2 hours of the run-out tide, or maybe in the first 2 hours of the flood tide, or so you could go there, you could tell somebody, go there, and they bring you up and say, oh, I went there, it was no good. And then you ask them, did you go there at the end of the tide, like I told you? Oh, no, I went there at the start of the tide, but surely they should be there the whole time. We didn't get any. And you say to them, well, you were there at the wrong time of tide, whereas Port Phillip, everyone says tide this, tide that. Port Phillip, I don't even consider the tide at all. I don't believe it has any impact for me on snapper fishing. And so I have longer bite times, less inhibited by tide. I don't have as much of the wind against tide. So Westerport is a fantastic fishery and I love it. But it can frustrate you as soon as that tide turns around and the fish switch off here and you got to move and you got to go somewhere else just to get tide and wind right, So it is a little bit easier to fish Port Phillip. That's probably but I really love Westernport. I've caught some beautiful snapper. We've caught a lot of snapper there, but we probably catch, on average, our snapper size in Westernport is probably, more of a 1 to 4 kilo size. We still get the odd big one, but I just feel that in Port Phillip, we catch a lot more than the odd big one there. And I think it's just through sheer numbers. If you get 1,000 fish, one of them is going to be a big one sooner or later.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so let's also, Justin, question for you, and I'll throw to James the same question as well. Do bigger snapper hang around with the smaller ones, or to get a big snapper, do you need to go looking for those big fish archers? What's your thoughts, Justin?
Normally, if we're catching reasonably sized snapper, say, I know, anything from 40 over and even 50 over, in that sort of group, you will catch that bigger fish. But a lot of the times they are tidal, and it just depends what you get on them tides. And once that tide's gone, once that bite's gone, they're gone.
Okay, and for you, James, what are your thoughts? Big fish in pink, school fish size, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's probably a couple of the biggest ones that have been mixed in with pinkies. And I remember one day we almost bagged out on just legal through to about sort of 50s. And that's, for a group of probably 8 guys. So we had a lot of fish. And then somewhere in between it all, we had a stingray took off, which didn't end up being a stingray. It was a nearly 23 pounder. And that was just in amongst the pinkies. And then we did it again. Actually, we've done it a few times like that. Like we're catching smaller fish and then just out of the blue, I actually had one day we were measuring. They were all like 28s, 27 and a halves, 28 and a halves. And we got quite a few. We probably had 30 or 40 of them. And then just out of nowhere, one of the snatches buckled over and we had a 9.1 kilo one. And some people say to me, oh, you know what? Like the big ones, you have to target them specifically. The only thing I will say is that if you catch a big one somewhere, if we're fishing that same, like go exactly back to the same spot the next day, so often we'll get another one. Or in the same day, you might get a pair. I feel like they'll be in a little group of 2 or 3. Like a good example was I had a mate, I gave him the marker, I found some fish one day. He went there and he rang me up and said, oh, I've got an 8 kilo snapper. And he said, thank you so much. It's my biggest snapper ever. He was so wrapped. So I went back there that afternoon and I got another one the same size. So, yeah, and I know in Westernport I've got a couple of little patches that seem to hold those better ones as well. So it's a little bit of both, isn't it, Justin?
Yeah, I was going to say, like that top end come winter time, like everyone knows there's resident fish that don't leave Westernport, and they're up in that top end. I think last year and the year before, I may have done 8 trips one season for 2 fish. So it's not easy fishing. If everyone thinks you just go out there and catch fish, you don't. You put the hours and you get the fish. So doing 8 trips and fishing the same mark for 8 trips and doing 12 hours a trip, it's not overly productive, but the end result's a big fish.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, a few more questions. Ken Oliver also asked, do you fish offshore also, James? Is that a part of the charter experience, or do you just prefer to stick, I know you stick a lot of the top end of the bay, offshore snapper? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I don't do that much of it because I believe that we've got such a good inshore fishery, but offshore, definitely, you just need to all those offshore reefs, and it really is just going out there, maybe getting a mark or two off one of your mates, have a look on the internet, find a couple of bits of reef, drift over them, and just keep drifting. So you don't want too windy. And then exactly what I do with the snapper snatches, just drift those snatches over reefs. So you don't have to have a circle hook. I'd probably put 2 hooks on as well because, it's 40 metres deep. Anything less than 40 metres, sometimes you start to get a lot of wrasse and stuff and, those pink perch. And so, 40 metres is a pretty good snapper depth out there, and just drifting along those reefs until you find them. When you find them, ping it and just keep drifting over the same spot.
Okay. Question to you both. If you're anchored up and catching snapper or attempting to catch snapper, is the sounder on or off? Do you think it bothers the fish?
I'll go. If I'm at the top end and I'm fishing for a night time and I'm in a ground where I don't really need the sounder and I don't really need to be turning around and looking at it all night thinking, oh, there's a fish under the boat, I turn it off because it annoys the absolute crap out of me and I'll end up watching the sounder instead of watching my rod. So if I'm fishing deeper water, say I'm fishing 12 to, say, 14 metres out of Hastings and stuff like that, the sounder's on. I don't think it really makes too much difference. So if I'm fishing shallow, it probably goes off and it's probably more superstitious than anything. But I just turn it off and the lights are off on the boat and I'm sitting there in the dark. So
fantastic. Yeah. Okay, yourself, James?
Yeah, well, my experience is, or my opinion is that it doesn't matter how much noise you make, no matter what you do, you can't scare the snapper away. So I never turn it off, except that I reckon I wore out my last transducers. I left them on all the time, so it's not just on all day. And so Bruno said to me, that's because you've been running them for 3 or 4 years all day. You can't do that. You just got to let it be off sometimes. So that's the only reason I would turn them off.
Yeah, that's very true, James. It's certainly in a lot of my sounder research that they do have moving parts. So the internal that's creating the clicking sound is generally a ceramic ball, and the more that ball's clicking, the more it's wearing down eventually. So particularly in charter world, but to the average person, like how many hours are you doing throughout the year? So if we just talk engine hours for a minute, how many engine hours would you do on your main boat throughout the year, James, roughly?
Probably average sort of 12 to 1,300 hours. So
if you're looking, and your motors are obviously off when you're snapper fishing and fishing for gummies, except tuna, so you could probably at least add 2/3 or even 3/4 of hours on the water to your 1,200 hours. So, you've 5,000 hours of potential transducer running time. It just goes to show that if that's the case, that's more than the average fisher would do in a lifetime. That's just a weekend warrior like most of us. So, that's a well done to you. That's a lot of commitment there. All right, now, here's a good one. You mentioned at the start of the show, James, that you love eating snapper. Now, tell us what's your preferred recipe and your preferred size to eat, if there's one. Because we've got a photo of a delicious dish that you've got here. Do you want to just talk us through this dish here and what's your preferred snapper size at the same time?
Well, I guess it varies, because sometimes, through the season, you 40 centimetre ones and you're wishing you had a 2 kilo one. But I think probably the primo size for me is about 36 centimetres, 33 to 36. I don't know about you, Tris.
Yeah, I'd say.
Just the ones that you can still fit on a plate. You can get them in a pan. I actually, you go through phases. I really do like deep fried. And that picture, that picture that you can see there, that probably is one of my I just love like a Thai or a Malaysian style curry snapper. Just deep fry the snapper, make a curry with some nice crunchy vegetables, or just go down to your local Thai shop and get them to make you a curry. It costs you 10 or 15 bucks. You tip it over your deep fried fish and it is incredible. And you know what? A lot of people say to me, snapper are not that good. And I totally disagree. I think it's just how you cook it. And, you know, snapper is a fish that loves being fried, I think. It really loves it. A lot of my Malaysian customers and Singapore customers, man, they absolutely love a snapper curry. And I think it lends itself really well to a curry. The other thing is, so I'm married into a Samoan family, and I don't know if you've had much to do with, you know, the islander culture and the food, but raw fish is probably much more interesting to us than the cooked fish sometimes. So I reckon that a snapper chopped up into pieces of, you know, small pieces of flesh, and then we mix it with cucumber and spring onion and tomato and coconut milk and some lemon and a little bit of salt in there is just one of the most amazing. The raw fish dish that they make is just, I can eat it all day, every day, never get sick of it. So a 5 kilo snapper can just get polished off really quickly in one sitting that way.
Well, the Samoan families can be very big families as well, having a few Samoan friends. So, and fishing and food really brings many of our cultural communities together. So, and what a great thing to share around fresh fish as well. Now, Tristan, I'm going to get you to come up and show us your youthful looks in the camera. Get nice and close, because here's a couple of good questions for you, mate. So, what depths do you really like fishing soft plastics with for snapper, mate? If you had a preferred depth.
Well, generally, because most of the time when I'm soft plasticking, I'm with my dad, and generally we're out deeper, like I'd say 15 meters and above. So I'd say I fish that most of the time, that depth. Otherwise, in shallower, like around 5-6 meters.
5-6 meters, okay. All right. And what about jigging for snapper? Because I'm a big fan of slow pitch jigging, like your little jig par of 40 grams. Use those offshore a lot for the wrasse and getting cooter and stuff for gummy baits. Do you do any jigging at all, Tristan, or do you find that snapper can work well with jigging?
Like I've tried it before, but it just seems, I don't know, I've never had as much success with the jigs as much as the plastics. And like I've seen plenty of videos and plenty of people tell me, oh, you got to try this jig, you got to do it like this. But I don't know, I just stick to what I know, and yeah.
Cool, no worries. All right, now one for Dad again. Tell me now, Costa's asked this one. How important is it anchoring once you find the arches? How close should you be? So, you know, if you're finding arches, the typical sort of school of thought from what I know is you want to be casting back into that school and not necessarily dropping the pick on their heads. So, James, how do you measure it out, and what's your theory on anchoring up to a school?
Costa, I'll give you a good example if you can hear me. Definitely you need to be close. So about 6 or 7 years ago, I found a Christmas tree, absolute 100% perfect. And they were clumped up. There was like, you know, I took a photo and I could see there was 10 or 15 big clumpy things in there. And I thought, there's no doubt at all. So I anchored up. I anchored 3 times, and the third time I got to about 12 metres. So when I was standing at the back of the boat, they would have been about 12 metres to my left, which is on the starboard side of the boat. So I wasn't looking directly at the back of, like from the back of the boat at them. And I kept thinking, 12 metres. And so I was throwing burley pellets as far as I could in that corner. And I knew that that would be the spot where we would start getting bites from that corner, but I had to pull them over. I sat there for 45 minutes and did not get one bite. And in the end, I was so frustrated. I pulled up the anchor and I went off looking. I was nearly at the end of my charter and I was nearly at the end of my wits because I couldn't believe I didn't get a bite out of that. I drove around for 1 hour. I could not find another thing anywhere that was worth anchoring on. So I went back, sounded around where I'd seen them, saw nothing. And then in an act of desperation, I dropped the anchor this time and got myself exactly where they were, exactly, because I still had the mark on my GPS. 5 minutes later, I had like an 8-way hookup and it kept going until I think I had 10 people on the boat that day and we bagged out and I was 12 metres off. So the key thing is don't sit there feeling like maybe I'm not quite in the right spot. Just keep pulling your anchor up and doing it until you feel really good. Think about which way the tide's going. Think about, because Westernport and Port Phillip are both the same. Westernport's harder because little variances, they change where you're going to end up, but you still got to be right because you will be second-guessing yourself. And if you don't catch, you'll be blaming yourself as well. And I guarantee that day I learned a massive lesson that I did already know it, but I learned it again. And it's so important.
Fantastic. And to you again, James, Kai Chesterfield says, in peak season, if there's 10 plus boats on a mark, do you fish with them or do you move on and find quieter space? Now, if that was me, I can't stand fishing marks for snapper. Go check marks, obviously, that I've found myself. But if there's other boat activity, I can't stand it. That's just me personally. I like fishing solo and away from people. You in the charter game, James, sometimes you don't have that luxury because you can get followed, you get your marks pinged and all that sort of stuff. And one of the brand attributes of the Just Your Average Fisho's sort of page is let's teach you techniques so you can go do your own thing, find your own space, because that's so important to improve your fishing rather than dump it on a mark time after time and hope you're going to catch fish. So what do you do, James? If some of your prime marks where fish are from your social media and people that are keeping you in the know, there's lots of people, do you just move on or do you actually pull up next to them? What are your thoughts?
So I absolutely hate being in the thick of the crowd, obviously. I hate being followed because, you find that you do the hard work, you find the fish and everyone just comes and anchors next to you. That's all frustrating, but I also accept that it is part and parcel. So fishing the top end of Port Phillip, you've just got to get with the picture of the program and you just have to accept that you have to fish in the thick of the crowd sometimes because when there's a crowd, like you fish at Altona when there's a bite on, and my goodness, you can walk from boat to boat and you get to see the aggro. I just wish the aggro could come out of it because you know what? Sometimes you do have to fish next to each other and I think the way to do it, you've just got to be nice and courteous. There's no reason why people can't pull up beside someone. And I've done this so many times. I've waved in a guy and said, just park right up alongside me. Just leave sort of 8 metres in beside us so we can both flick our rods a little bit to the right and to the left. Sometimes we're going to cross lines. We're going to hook each other. But that's the only way we're both going to get fish because the fish are behind my boat. If you park 15 metres beside me, you're not going to be getting them. And we all know that, sometimes it's the right-hand side of the boat getting bites, the left, whatever. That's where they are. If you park too far away, you won't catch. Sometimes everyone's desperate to get a fish, but if we do it nicely sometimes and we make friends with each other rather than, people starting to, yell and swear and then the fishing fun is gone. And unfortunately, south of Black Rock, I feel that people keep their distance a bit more. North of Black Rock, it's a different ball game. People just park next to each other, and so you just got to accept that. Maybe you pull up to someone and say, "Hey, mate, I know there's fish here. I was here just before. I was here this morning, and I did really, really well. Do you mind if I just pull up alongside you?" And just enough room so that they're not getting tangled on you and whatnot.
Very, very well spoken, James. And I'd like to reassure some of the values of our page in the sense that fishing is free, and you invest a lot of time and effort into marks, but you try not to be mark-based fishermen if you can. Like, do research, look at areas, obviously go to known areas and so forth, but have confidence in yourself to find and investigate, and a lot of that learning is there. And especially when snapper season is so busy at the ramps too, we have some difficulties with the number of ramps and the queues you can get at ramps, and there's a lot of people that are fishing for the first time and need to take their time, and having people toot horns and yell and abuse when you could actually just hop out of your car if you're a few boats back, give them a hand, and they'll be out of everyone's way, and very thankful of it too. The fishing community rallies together to get free ramps. It rallies together to put pressure on Mr. Andrews to let us go fishing from Monday onwards. But I can tell you, the fishing community also turns to the absolute Scheisenhausen very quickly on each other if things don't go their way. So extending a bit of that courtesy, very well said, James. Thank you for sharing that too. Now, a couple more questions, and unfortunately, this show, we've just the interaction from you guys online and everyone that's following us, and these shows have become very popular, and James and Justin with their knowledge has been amazing. We're not going to get to everyone tonight. I'll certainly stay online for a little while and try and help follow up. Tristan, I'm just going to ask you a quick one. Have you ever fished Westernport with plackies, or have you ever done a plackie, Justin, as well? Have you ever done a plackie on a bomb sinker and on the drift in Westernport? That was a good question from before.
Yeah, I've tried before, but because of the tide, sometimes it's just impossible. Like, I can really rip really fast, and yeah, before you know it, your plastic is miles away. So most of the time I tend to give up. But generally, if there's a bit of current or something, sometimes I don't bother going upsizing like gearheads, and I'll just actually add like a running ball sinker to that. So then that way you can keep the same size hook without getting a really massive jig head, and you just add that ball sinker, and then your plastic should be on the bottom in no time.
Fantastic. And Justin, yourself?
Yeah, that tide slowed up, and if I've used a snapper snatcher and stuff like that down that western entrance, and I'm not fishing too deep and the tide's starting to slow up, I've used a snapper snatcher and actually put a jig on the second hook of the snapper snatcher, and I've probably put a tentacle hanging off it as well, just for a bit of teasing. And I have caught fish, but was it the jig head? Was it the bait? Not too sure.
Okay. We'll get one final question in because he's a good friend of mine, Travis from Complete Angler Ringwood, and he's asked, does anyone know if snappers sleep? James, you got any thoughts on that, or Justin?
I do.
Go for it.
Go, James.
Yeah, well, I've done a lot of diving, and what I've noticed is, so I've seen snapper when I'm night diving, I've seen them during the day. And they do, I wouldn't say, they definitely don't have a doona and a pillow where they curl up and snuggle up to, but they go into a sort of a dormant mode where they're just sort of hanging there. And so, like, when we shine the torch on them, they just almost look like an aquarium fish. Just whereas during the day when they're active, yeah, they're constantly moving. And so that, and also because of like when we're fishing, it's so funny how we notice every single time when you're on a sunset bite, they just start to fizzle in Port Phillip as it gets to a point where it's a little bit too dark for them to see. And it's like they're really active, and then all of a sudden they slow down, and it's just they slow down. Even their bite, the way their bite slows down, we actually get the hook on them differently after dark at that time because they don't actually mouth the bait the same way. And so you can't, on a circle hook, we can't just lean back on them the same way. You've sort of got to let them take it a bit more because they're just really, it's like they're going sleepy on you. So that's what I would notice.
Sure, okay. Well, I suppose that we'll finish up here, and I just want to extend my greatest thanks because the information that yourself, James, Justin and Tristan have shared tonight has been absolutely fantastic. We've all got to get to bed because we've got Mother's Day, phone calls to make early in the morning, and I've got young boys who are going to get me up at an absolute sparrows to give all the handmade cards that we did in homeschooling during the week to my beautiful wife. Prize winner tonight, Costa Cangelaris, for how important is anchoring close to the arches. I think that was a fantastic question. So thanks, Ben, our producer. You have won the Complete Angler Ringwood prize pack. We'll get that to you. If you just buzz me through the page or via Messenger, I'll get your details and get that pack out to you straight away. Obviously, if you're wanting to book a snapper charter in Port Phillip Bay and also even tuna charters, wrasse charters and different things like that, of course, look up Unreel Fishing Charters, and you can Google Unreel Fishing Charters as well. You have a wonderful website showing your fleet there, James, and some of the fish that you've caught. If you need some help fishing in Westernport, you've obviously got Justin Blythe and Justin Blythe Fishing Guides pages that you can follow on Facebook. And of course, like and share Just Your Average Fishos around as much as you can. We thank Ben at We Are Technical for helping produce the show. And of course, you'll notice that my boat's back from being serviced from the boys at Streaker Marine. Those guys are absolute champions. And these are not sponsored messages by any means. Now, I think Jussie's got a one parting thing there, mate.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, with the Just Your Average Fisho and stuff like that, and obviously people coming on and speaking online, if you can take one thing out of anything we say on here, like, I love my fishing, I've got a passion for fishing, James does, you do, but if people can be confident in what they're doing from what we're sharing, that's what makes me happy, as in what we're doing. So,
for sure.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree with you more. Like, look at the archives of all of the Just Your Average Fishos articles. Really, we ramped it up middle of 2017, just sharing some of our knowledge, and we don't know it all, hence the name Just Your Average Fishos. Now, a lot of people have been buzzing me and asking me, what are the next shows that are coming up? Well, to be honest, we're hoping to put together a really big game show. But we've got to acknowledge that a lot of these guys are doing it pretty tough in the charter game, and they might just be able to start getting fishing soon. And we want you, the audience, to enjoy your fishing too. So if weather's conducive next Saturday night and people are able to fish, we want to make sure that we've still got an audience to come to. So I'll come out with some more information once we know a little bit more on Monday or Tuesday about getting a game show together. And we might actually have a week's break. But our intention is to keep these shows going on, because we are supporting those who are giving us a lot of information. And it would really, really please me if that you, the Just Your Average Fishos following and the community, could help support those charterers that come on. And that's everyone from the Westernport Charters guys, Justin Blythe, Fruits from Think Big Fishing, obviously James at Unreel, Richie Abella for Game Fishing Charters, all those sorts of things. We've had some wonderful, wonderful people come onto the show, and we want to continue these shows and mix them up a bit more. So thank you very much for following us. To all those people that have in their Facebook messages or in their notifications an invite from the Just Your Average Fishos page to follow us, please make sure that you follow us, because we can help keep spreading the words. Again, we're not sponsored, we're unbiased, and we say what we say with the information that we glean from our own fishing and our reports. So until next time, which will maybe next week or maybe the week after, we will let you know. This is Justin, James, Tristan and Juzzy Blythe and Ben behind the scenes, over and out. And thank you so much to the guests. Thank you for joining us. We wish that we're fishing soon, and always be safe on the water. Thanks.
Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day. My word. See you later, guys.
See you guys.